We're back, and definitely not having any additional OBS problems from earlier, with Season 6, Episode 23, Where the Apple Lies, which is the episode in which Applejack lies, and then lies, and then lies, and then lies. If that doesn't get it across, I got nothing. It's mostly a flashback episode. So, Apple Bloom says, "Yep, I totally kept track of everything." And, if you pay attention, Apple Bloom lies twice here, which I bring up because it's going to come up later. But a kid's natural tendency to lie is interesting and fascinating to talk about psychologically speaking. There's inherent fears built into, well, any kind of social species. Par exemple, being exiled, being punished. You know, I mean, to put this into context, let's say that you accidentally, ruin a crop, and so now people are going to go without food for the next, however many weeks or something like that. People don't tend to take that too well. It's understandable why we still have this kind of inherent tendency to lie when it comes to avoiding consequence, even though nowadays, for the most part, overall, statistically speaking, we're not going to, send my niece to the gulag or exile her or whatever, simply because of the fact that she happened to, spill some milk or whatever, right? We're past that point, societally, technologically, but if we're being honest, we're not that far past it. I would say probably about 4 generations ago-ish, we were still at a point in human society where there were still places where lying for situations like this was still a survival tactic. So it's understandable. It doesn't make it right, doesn't make it good. It's still something we need to wean ourselves off of, I do think. As I ranted about excessively earlier today, I do think we need to get to the point where we are lying less with regards to our society, not just from a economic and corporate perspective, just from a personal perspective, right? I have already had the chat more than once with my niece, which boils down to, if you do something bad, that's whatever. But if you lie about it, that makes it worse. And explaining why that is to her, since I'm really big on explaining whys to my niece whenever I talk to her about stuff. And in case you're wondering, par example, let's say that you... I don't know, what's a good example? Let's say that you swap the jar labels on something by accident, and so the stuff that's going to go bad is over here, and the stuff that's not is over here. So we go ahead and let the stuff over here that's not going to go bad just we sell that immediately. But the stuff that's going to go bad, we just let sit there because we think it's reversed. Yes, I'm basically pulling this from the episode, but you get the point, right? In this situation, that lie, not uncovered, actually makes things worse because it was uncovered, because we are operating on false information. We can't fix it if we don't know what's wrong. Now, I've actually pointed this out before. This actually boils down to a lot of aspects of human society, including just simple critique and criticism. For example, I don't want people to constantly praise me with regards to the show or something I've written or something I've made music-wise, unless you mean it. Because, knowing that I did good, that's awesome. But if you don't tell me honest feedback, I don't know if I've done something wrong and I can't correct it, right? Pretty simple. And if you give me honest feedback and I reject it, that doesn't mean I'm dismissing it out of hand. It just means I am, for my own reasons, not going to go along with that, right? Like making a playlist for every single game I've ever streamed. Anywho, so it's an understandable thing, and again, it's a very, very common thing. I'd like to say amongst children, because I most notice this particular psychological trick amongst children, but I've seen it in adults plenty as well. Meanwhile, Rich is afraid of Granny, as he should be. There's this bit where Applejack, they're saying, you might as well tell her the whole story now. How many of you have a story you would be embarrassed to have shared with someone else? I'm not going to share any right now. I've shared plenty on this show. I think I don't need to go into that, but it's just a bit of a relatable right there. You have never been embarrassed in your life, Lord Harriman. I roll to disbelieve. Where's my dice? There it is. There it is. Hang on. Let's see how much I believe you. Well, I got a 12. That's not great. I might believe your blatant lie. See, this whole episode's about lying, and Lord Hermon is trying to use a direct corollary to the episode's Aesop. There's this bit where, oh, to your family. Okay, gotcha. Still not sure I believe you, but that's okay. I'll believe that you're alien. How's that? Now, Big Mac is written fascinatingly here. I admit I probably picked up on this more because lately I've been doing a lot of dialogue writing since I've been writing the Lorecraft narrations. And one of the things I'm really big on is trying to make sure that there's a flow and design and cadence and all that to the writing, but more importantly that it is truncated. I'm trying to get across as much information as quickly and efficiently as possible. Because if I just talk about certain aspects of Warcraft lore, we'll be here all day. I should know, we already did that. By contrast, Big Mac is written to be kind of leaning the opposite. He's not full opposite. I've seen people say, sentences upon sentences and convey no information whatsoever. What he's doing, however, is definitely more trying to just ramble on in a way that doesn't actually convey anything. I actually wrote down, so at one point he says something about, ideas are ideas, but unless you got a thing to tell them, it doesn't really matter because it's blah 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 fla blah blah fla flim fla flim fla fla blah 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 is roughly how long he goes on. And I actually structured that down a little bit more. What he says is, ideas require practical application to matter, and I've told you this before. So you can kind of see how he's being. His sentences are being elongated, effectively. Just not to the point of insanity. I find that interesting in its own right, and I'll get to that in just a moment. Probably Darth Medoro. But before we go into that, first we have to talk about Spoiled Milk. First of all, her name is Spoiled Milk. I mean, Spoiled Rich is bad enough as well, but Spoiled Milk? Yeah. Once again, I get the very strong impression, I've actually talked about this before, that this woman is not actually wealthy and not actually powerful. That she's one of those Novu, fake, pretends to be rich, pretends to be upper crust of society, whereas she actually isn't kind of people. I was talking about people like that earlier today, too. Come to that. Yeah, no, she's absolutely married above her status, but married into actual wealth, because Filthy Rich is actually wealthy. Which makes me wonder, what the hell does Rich see in her? Like, is she great in bed? Now, that may sound like a weird thing to say, and that's because it is, but I will admit, at several times in my life, I have seen two people who have decided to become a couple. And the only thought I can have is, why? What do you see in them? How many of you have ever had that thought? What do you see in that person? God. Anyways. It's worth noting that there's actually a lot of reasons for people to marry or otherwise get together with someone that they probably shouldn't. The most common one in my observation, this is of course just here in the United States, is desperation. I don't mean that as an insult, to be clear. What I mean is some people get to points in their lives where they really don't want to be alone, or they really don't want to spend their life alone, or they're willing to settle. You get it. And so they go with the next person in line, so to speak, the next person to either pursue them, or the next person they see where they feel anything for, or whatever, and thus they settle. And to be completely blunt, that's exactly the vibe I get here, is that Filthy is settling for Spoiled. Now, this is MLP, so even a rich snob like her is not as bad as the kind of people that she would be in real life, because real life women like her are despicable, disgusting human beings, and yes, I have known several, thank you for asking. Never dated one. Not that stupid. But in the MLP verse, she's merely a snob, which is a lot more tolerable. It does. That is an interesting question, Sean. And someone mentioned earlier it's possible this was an arranged marriage. Considering the kind of aristocracy stuff that goes on in MLP, especially amongst Canterlot, it wouldn't surprise me that much. Either way, I can only speculate. It struck me there. I was like, why did you... Why? Okay. So I already mentioned Big Mac. He's very well written here. This then leads to another scene where there's a lot of, yeah, I've been there. You ever have an idea that you want to present to someone, and you don't really have the confidence to present that idea? So you just kind of fumble over the presentation of your idea? Maybe you're afraid of the person you're saying it to. Maybe they're an authority figure who you're worried about, you're anxious about. Maybe it's your boss, or your mom, or your dad, or your brother, or whatever. Your boss. I already said boss, didn't I? Yeah. That's, Anyways. Really felt for Applejack as she was trying to sell Granny on her let's sell cider idea. Because, yeah, I've been there. In fact, I've been told repeatedly in the last week by my sister that my single biggest problem I have in life right now is a lack of confidence, which is absolutely correct. I have very little confidence in my life right now. It's okay, I'll get back there someday. Used to be extremely confident. Then I got run over by a car. Anyways, so this then leads to a problem. And I quote, cider starts to spoil the second it comes out of the press. Alright, first point. I feel like this is being done in an attempt to try and explain the problem back in Super Squeezy, Spider CZ, whatever it is, way back in the first Flim and Flam episode. Second of all, that's stupid. I mean, yes, obviously Spider does... Spider? Cider starts to spoil the moment it comes out. That is actually true. But we've had so many different ways of preserving for, like, decades, if not centuries, depending on how you want to define preserving, that the very fact that they're unwilling or incapable of doing any manner of preservation is bizarre at the first point. Like, just the very first point is, wait, what? You can't do anything to preserve that? This brings us to the second point. You have magic. Large scale... Now, I know they don't actually specifically have magic, but how hard would it be to hire a unicorn to come in to cast a quick preservation spell on your cider so you would have a smoother sales thing in order to help keep your farm afloat? Like, this isn't a minor thing, which is my point. If this was just a little bonus stuff, sure, but this is, and this has been repeated multiple times, including in this episode, this is how they keep the farm afloat through the winter months. This is necessary. So take the effort to go and to hire a unicorn to come in and go, bzz. This leads me to my third point. Imperial Star Destroyer got there right before me. Refrigerators canonically exist in this setting. Which leads me to my fourth point, and this is the most obvious point of all. That's why I wanted to leave it for last. In the very sentence where she's talking about how, you know, the cider goes bad, she mentions they have jars to preserve the jam. Now, first time I saw this episode, exactly, as I was. First time I saw this episode, I thought that's the direction they were going in. That this is a tradition for tradition's sake, and this was going to be the overall Aesop and approach of the episode. Is, this is something we don't do anymore, and this would lead to greater, you know, some world building about their connection between, you know, stronger connection between Filthy and the farm, and how they, you know, sell cider nowadays, and how they've improved their system. And no, it's just thrown away. It's just in the background as a minor C plot to the actual point of Applejack lying too much. If I might be so bold, I think an episode about fixing that tradition for tradition's sake would have been more interesting than the one we got. But I digress. So, this then leads to something the episode doesn't even mention. Yeah, no kidding, Aseros. The episode doesn't even mention this. The episode actually gives us a valid reason that Granny Smith might have used for not wanting to be on contract for X number of cider shipments per month or per year or whatever. What is that reason? Variable quality and quantity of product. Now, if you don't know what I mean by that, and this is actually relevant to a lot of industries, One of the biggest problems with these kind of contracts is that you have now legally presumed that you are now going to provide X during Y, right? Now, generally speaking, what you will do is you will promise X when you are pretty sure X is about half of what you can produce. Now, this is a rough number, and these numbers might have changed since I last studied this figure, but this was a normal feature, because there might be issues, there might be a bad harvest, there might be problems with the production line, you might have a repair issue that costs you time, you might have people quit, you might have to fire people, people might die. There are so many things that might go wrong with regards to a production cycle that you don't promise what you can actually produce. You promise less than you can produce, right? That would have been an interesting, and I mean, maybe I'm just a bit of an economic geek, but I think that would have been an interesting take to take here as well. No, we can't promise this. We're not sure how much cider we can even push out every year. And they're going to expect it, and they're going to want it, and let's just keep going with the first come, first serve, because that way, at the very least, we are selling 100%, rather than being obligated to sell an amount that may or may not be how much we produce. Instead, this is also thrown by the wayside immediately and completely not addressed. It's obvious I didn't care about this episode that much, but I'm not really even at the part that bothered me yet. Because right now all we have is some Voyager stuff, right? Just failed potential. So, this then leads to Applejack going to tell the truth to Filthy. Filthy then comes down on her pretty hard. Now, I'm reading a lot into this because this show in general has excellent animations and excellent voice acting, so forgive me for presuming quality of production fine, but it's worth noting that, near as I can tell, what Filthy is doing here is what we call amateurish negotiation. What do I mean by that? Anybody... This happens a lot. A lot of people who don't actually know how to negotiate in business deals presume that what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to negotiate hard, right? Not going past this point, and you're going to do this or else, is basically the summary of what that kind of negotiation style is. I'm sure you've seen that. In fact, you've probably seen that in real life. I've seen that all the time in business. What I'm trying to say here is Filthy, and yes, thank you, S.A. Ross, we just established this, just took over from Stinking Rich. Filthy is negotiating hard because he has no idea how to negotiate. He is an amateur. Now that makes sense. This is actually well written, in my opinion. It makes perfect sense that he would try to negotiate hard because he has no idea what he's doing and he's trying to make his mark, right? He's trying to establish his trend and bring in more money and blah, 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 right? The other reason I think he's negotiating hard and has no idea what he's doing is the moment, the second that there's any chink in that. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. Is Granny okay? Like, I feel like that's actual, Filthy completely dropping the act there and being like, oh my God, is she going to be all right? Because as I've said before, Filthy is pretty legit. It's another reason why I just look at his wife choice and just kind of raise an eyebrow. Anyways. Oh, I don't disagree, Lord Harrimont. It is an amateur move, like I said. So he negotiates hard and threatens to discontinue, his contract with the apples. That's the real negotiate hard. I mean, yeah, sure, he yells and he comes down sounding angry. But no, the real actual point he pushes is, we're going to chop off business dealings with you, which is insanely stupid of him if he was to actually do that. Anybody who has ever actually negotiated before can recognize that for exactly what that is, a bluff. No. No. You don't threaten your only supplier of one of your major selling items seasonally that you're going to chop off from them with no one else to replace them because of something this minor. Nevertheless, it doesn't... Now, all of this is speaking bad of him, although I do think this is well written rather than badly written. Speaking of well written, I will give credit to AJ, who takes this threat very seriously, because she doesn't know. How much negotiation tactics does Applejack know at this point in time? So, yeah, no, of course Applejack takes this threat seriously. And there's a reason I keep focusing on this moment. It's because the entire rest of the episode hinges on this exact threat. We're going to cut off sales with you. This actually comes up later, too, in actual spoken dialogue. Now, this is a big freaking deal for the episode's purpose. So, this leads to lie number 1. Oh, she's sick. Okay. Now, he pulls back on that. And if we're being honest with ourselves, lie number 1 makes perfect sense. Really. She was freaking out. She doesn't want to lose the sales here, and she doesn't want to be caught in her lie, obviously. So Granny's not feeling well. That's why we can't commit to this. Sorry. Heat of the moment, under gun, blah blah blah. Perfect sense make. Completely with it. That leads to almost immediately to lie number 2. That's when Filthy and Spoiled come by to visit Granny while she's sick. Okay. Now this is pretty much exactly the same type of lie. I mentioned this earlier, that Apple Bloom did. Remember I mentioned how Apple Bloom lied twice? The first lie is screwing up. The second lie is, no, I didn't screw up. Everything's fine. Now this second lie, yeah, Big Mac is actually great in this episode. The second lie is, well, I don't want to get caught, is really what the second lie boils down to. And it's doubling down. We don't want to get in trouble. We don't want to make things worse. This leads immediately into lie number 3. And I stopped counting at that point because this is when we start to spiral. This is also when the episode starts to lose me. I do want to give special credit to both the animation and the voice acting, like I mentioned earlier, because the way Applejack is done here is brilliant. You can tell, obviously, but visually as well as audibly, that she is absolutely losing control of this situation. And just... the frequency of lies starts increasing, too. I love this. She's got the apple blight. She's in the hospital. Oh, God, we need to get Granny there. There's an apple blight. We're supposed to go in the back. It just starts to be a little rapid fire here. Like I said, this is when the episode loses me because A, I don't find lying particularly funny. B, I don't like lying comedy, which is a very common trope that is used in a lot of shows, including this one. And C, and this was mentioned in chat earlier while we were still watching it, I have to admit that the episode gets a little bit ham-fisted with its overall message, which is funny because, and this is not the first time I've said this on an MLP Streamination, I actually think the intended Aesop is the far less interesting one to the unintended one, but I'll get there later. Anyways, I say unintended, that's not fair. They do call it out on camera. Moving on. So, Applejack, there is a point at which it's clear that Applejack is more freaking out about losing the farm than she is about getting caught in the lie. Credit where credit is due. It's probably one of the best character moments for Applejack in the whole episode. Because even when she was young, and even when she was lying her teeth off, she still cared about the well-being of her people and her family over, not getting caught. She wasn't doing it from a purely selfish perspective. And I will admit, as much as it sounds weird, that helps salvage the episode substantially for me. Anywho, we had a Shining reference. Twins in the hallway. And Derpy was getting surgery. Now, we've actually seen Derpy as a filly before, where her eyes were already crossed. So I like to think that she was trying to get eye corrective surgery, trying to fix the thing. Sadly, that, obviously didn't work. There's only so much we can do with eye surgery with our incredibly advanced technology of not being able to preserve cider. Anyways. They go into a public viewing surgery room where they are super tolerant of everything. That's just entering total nonsense territory, but whatever at this point. And then the big lesson comes in. Yay, lesson. Lying sucks. And lying to cover up lying sucks, and blah, blah, blah. The Aesop smashes you in the face. There's nothing really to add there. I do want to point out, though, that there is another... well, there's actually 2 other Aesops in this episode. First of all, that Granny Smith is terrifying. You notice that Granny Smith negotiated hard with the viewing angle, right? Like, there's a wide shot that shows the people who clearly do not actually want to hear about the apple blight, but go along with it because they're terrified of her. Weird ending. I don't know if this causes a wah-wah. Apple Bloom may or may not be born yet, depending. We do know, canonically, I looked this up, that Applejack and Big Mac's parents are off on vacation during this episode, so that's why they're not present. So this is before they died. We'll get to the wah-wah in just a second, because, first of all, the other 2 Aesops are the one they actually call out, which is actually my favorite Aesop in the episode. pointing out that someone has screwed up or pointing out a flaw in something and job done. No, don't do that. The ridiculous majority of people do that. I do that on occasion. I try not to. It's something I actively fight not to do. It's one of the reasons I have that phrase, I don't like to criticize without critiquing. You know, I try to point out something and how it could be done better, as I've already done this very episode. It is ridiculous how many people will just say, hey, you screwed up on this thing, and act like fond of the whole thing, like act satisfied, like they have accomplished something by pointing out the flaw or the mistake or whatever, without having done anything to attempt to assist or correct or anything. It drives me batty, personally. It's something a friend of mine used to do constantly. I say friend, an acquaintance of mine used to do constantly. It drove me nuts. And if you're not paying attention, that's mostly how they were trying to portray Big Mac in this episode. And I did pay attention, and for the most part, no, Imperial Starship, at least not that I'm aware of. For the most part, that is how he was acting. Big Mac was consistently just saying, you can't do this, or this doesn't work, and not doing anything to actually contribute to the conversation, which is probably part of the empty text he was saying earlier as well. The third Aesop is probably the least intended one in the episode, and that is the fact that who we are is not always who we were. Put simply, the idea that we grow and change and learn and do and become so different than we are as a consequence of who we were. Not much of an Aesop so much as a that's just the way life works kind of a thing. But it is interesting to think about AESOP, von Falkenstein. It's named after a person, actually. And then the episode ends on, I think we could call this a wah-wah. What do y'all think? Is this a wah-wah? There it is. R. My notes. Right there. I think we're going to count this as a wah-wah. Granny Smith runs this farm. Ah ha ha ha. Fade to black. I mean, that sounds like a wah-wah to me. Oop. There's actually, it's going to sound weird considering we have 47 of those. There's a lot less of those than I thought there would be. Now, this was a pretty forgettable episode, so we're going to have to rate this one. This episode was done by Megan McCarthy, who actually just did story credits, so it might have been her notes that were then written by Dave Rapp. Now, Dave Rapp has only done 2 episodes so far. Newbie Dash, which we rated as a green, and Flutterbrudder, which is a lamentation. So... I am astonished that anyone is arguing yellow or orange, to be completely honest. I was going to suggest green for this one. I really think this is a below-average episode. Its Aesop is too obvious. It doesn't really do much with the characters. It's a fairly forgettable, boring episode. And, of course, its central point is a lying storm, which I don't enjoy. You've never heard of an Aesop before, Von Falk. You're serious. One moment. I'm blown away by that. I really am. Aesop was a Greek fabulist and storyteller credited with a number of fables now collectively known as Aesop's Fables. Although his existence remains unclear and no writings by him survive, numerous tales credited to him were gathered across the centuries and in many languages a storytelling tradition that continues to this day. His tales are characterized by animals and inanimate objects that speak, solve problems, and have human characteristics. Now, the whole point of an Aesop tale is... God, I don't even know another... It's a lesson. The whole point of the Aesop Fables is that it's a lesson. It's supposed to teach you something. It's supposed to impart upon... Yeah, the Frog and the Scorpion, that's an Aesop, for example. I am astonished. I mean, granted, I don't know. I've studied literature for most of my life, but yeah, what's the moral of the story? That's a good word, moral. The Aesop is the moral of the story. the purpose behind it. It's also, you've probably heard me distinguish between stories and tales. Tales almost universally have Aesops built into them. Stories don't necessarily have to. But, oh gosh, Von Falkenstein, that makes sense. Yeah, for the longest time I pronounced it Aesop, and then I was corrected on that, because it is apparently Aesop, at least here in English. But anyways, tales almost universally have Aesops, and kids' shows tend to have Aesops as well. Star Trek is another show that tends to try and have an Aesop and be like, hey, this, interfering with other cultures is bad, we should let them all die. Alright, someone argue me up to yellow. Hit me. S.A. Ross says there's good character moments with Applejack, Blig Mac, Big Mac, Granny, and Filthy.
Aesop.
Nope, I'm saying it right. Double checking. Big Mac is... Damn it! Big Mac is quite well... I mean, I don't disagree, S.A. Ross, but that's why I'm not arguing it to be blue. I do think this is a below-average episode. That's my overall thought process. But I will bend to the will of the people, again, and go ahead and push it up to an average episode, which I will never watch again, because it's not a good episode. Where's Miss McCarthy? There she is. Boop. There we go. So we'll put that as yellow. Oh! Next episode is one I forget even more. I consistently do not remember this episode. Every time I bring it up, I'm like, Yeah, I was debating continuity counter, because there's actually a lot of continuity in this episode, but nothing really triggered what I would think of as the continuity counter. Which is the whole point, is something where usage of continuity actively uplifts or adds to a work. Positive for continuity is really what that means. So while Spoiled Milk is back, and while the Filthy Rich connection is a continuity thing, and while, they've got the story for how Big Mac started doing his thing, and how Applejack started doing her thing, and we have the cider, which is connected to the episode's Squeezy's thing, and the jam, none of that really added to the episode's quality for me, which is why I didn't give any continuity counters for any of that. If we want to count all that, we could. What do you all think? Because we've got Applejack, Big Mac, Spoiled, Filthy, Cider, and Jam. So that's 6 if we do that. If I was to bend on that to kind of compromise, I would probably give 1 for the Jam specifically. Because I do think the increase of that adds to the episode. Hey, we got the Jam again. Or yeah, we could aggregate it. That's actually not a bad point. Let's do that. We'll add 1 for environmental continuity, as Larian puts it. We're actually up to here. Sorry. Double check and make sure the numbers are right, which they are. Okay.